Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming together to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. We are in Parshat Vayigash this week, which you can find beginning in the book of Genesis with chapter 44 at verse 18. If you'd like to go ahead and unmute, together we can recite our blessing for the joy of this moment together. Baruch atah Eloheinu melech haolam asher shanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot b'divrei Torah. Thank you, God, for this opportunity to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. So we'll read through our English translation of our Torah portion. I'll share with you a focused study of the portion, and then we'll open it up for our collaborative conversation about the portion. Chapter 44, verse 18. Then Judah went up to him and said, "Please, my Lord, let your servant appeal to my Lord, and do not be impatient with your servant, you who are the equal of Pharaoh." My Lord asked his servants, "Have you a father or another brother?" We told my Lord we had an old father, and there is a child of his old age, the youngest. His full brother is dead, so that he alone is left of his mother, and his father dotes on him. Then you said to your servants, "Bring him down to me, that I may set eyes on him." We said to my Lord, "The boy cannot leave his father. If he were to leave him, his father would die." But you said to your servants, "Unless your youngest brother comes down with you, do not let me see your faces." When we came back to your servant, my father, we reported my Lord's words to him. Richard, would you like to read a little starting at verse 25?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. Later, our father said, "Go back and procure some food for us." We answered, "We cannot go down. Only if our youngest brother is with us can we go down, for we may not show our faces to the man unless our youngest brother is with us." The servant my father said to us, "As you know, my wife bore me 2 sons, but one is gone from me." And I said, "Alas," and I said to us, but one is gone from me. And I said, "Alas, he was torn by a beast, and I have not seen him since. If you take this one from me too, and he meets this with disaster, you will send my white head down to Sheol in grief. Now, if I come to your servant, my father, and the boy is not with us, since his own life is so bound up with his, when he sees that the boy is not with us, he will die. And your servants will send the white head of your servant, our father, down to Sheol in grief. Now your servant has pledged himself for the boy to my father, saying, 'If I do not bring him back to you, I shall stand guilty before my father forever. Therefore, please let your servant remain as a slave to my Lord instead of the boy, and let the boy go back with his brothers. For how can I go back to my father unless the boy is with me? Let me not be witness to the woe that would overtake my father.'"
Thank you, Richard. Anna, would you like to read a little at the start of chapter 45?
Joseph could no longer restrain himself before all who were standing in attendance on him. So he cried, "Send everyone away from me," so that no one else was there when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. He gave voice to a loud wail, and the Egyptians heard. Pharaoh's palace heard. Joseph then said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father really alive?" But his brothers were unable to answer him. They recoiled in fear of him. Joseph went on to say to his brothers, "Come, draw near to me." So they drew near. He said, "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold to Egypt. And now don't be troubled, don't be chagrined because you sold me here, for it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. There have already been 2 years of famine in the land, and there remained 5 more years without plowing or harvesting. So God sent me ahead of you to assure your survival in the land and to keep you alive for a great deliverance.
Thank you so much. Sherry, would you like to continue reading?
Thank you. So it was not you who sent me here, but God, and he has made me a father to Pharaoh, lord of all his household, and ruler over all the whole land of Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me without delay. You will dwell in the region of Goshen, where you will be near me, you and your children and your grandchildren, your flocks and your herds, and all that is yours.
Steve, would you like to continue?
Oh, thank you. There I will provide for you, for there are yet 5 years of famine to come, that you and your household and all that is yours may not suffer want. You can see for yourselves, and my brother Benjamin for himself, that is indeed I who am speaking to you. And you must tell my father everything about my high station in Egypt and all that you have seen, and bring my father here with all speed.
Thank you, Steve. June, would you like to read starting at verse 14?
Thank you, Rabbi. And he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept upon his neck. And he kissed all his brethren and wept upon them. And after this his brethren talked with him. And the report thereof was heard in Pharaoh's house, saying, Joseph's brethren are come. And it pleased Pharaoh well and his servants. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, say unto thy brethren, this do ye, lade your beasts, and go and get you unto the land of Canaan, and take your father and your households, and come unto me, and I will give you the good of the land of Egypt, and ye shall eat the fat of the land. Now thou art commanded, this do ye, take you wagons out of the land of Egypt for your little ones and for your wives, and bring your father and come. Also regard not your stuff, for the good things of all of the land of Egypt, excuse me, are yours. And the sons of Israel did so, and Joseph gave them wagons according to the commandment of Pharaoh, and gave them provision for the way. To all of them he gave each man changes of raiment, but to Benjamin he gave 300 shekels of silver and 5 changes of raiment. And to his father he sent in like manner 10 asses laden with the good things of Egypt, and 10 she-asses laden with corn and bread, and the victuals for his father by the way. So he sent his brethren away, and they departed, and he said unto them, see that ye fall not out by the way. And they
Thank you
went
so-
up, oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you so much. And let me invite Dave to read starting at verse 25, and you can continue into chapter 46 as well.
They went up from Egypt and came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan. And they told him, Joseph is still alive. Yes, he is ruler of the whole land of Egypt. His heart went numb, for he did not believe them. But when they recounted all that Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent to transport him, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. Enough, said Israel. My son Joseph is still alive, and I must go see him before I die. So Israel set out with all that was his, and he came to Beersheba, where he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. God called to Israel in a vision by night. Jacob, Jacob, he answered, here. And he said, I am God, the God of your father. Fear not to go down to Egypt, for I will make you there into a great nation. I myself would go down with you in Egypt, and I myself will also bring you back, and Joseph's hand shall close. So Jacob set out from Beersheba, The sons of Israel put their father Jacob and their children and their wives in the wagons that Pharaoh had sent to transport him. And they took along their livestock and the wealth that they had amassed in the land of Canaan. Thus Joseph and all his offspring with him came to Egypt. He brought with them to Egypt his sons and grandsons, his daughters and granddaughters, all his offspring.
Thank you so much, Dave. Paul, would you like to read starting at verse 8?
Thank you, Rabbi. Now these are the names of the children of Israel who are coming to Egypt. Jacob and his children, Jacob's firstborn, Reuben. Reuben's sons, Hanach, Palu, Hezron, and Carmi. Shimon's sons, Jemuel, Jamin, Ohad, Yachin, Zohar, and Shaul, son of the Canaanite woman. Levi's sons, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. Judah's sons, Onan, Shelah, Perez, and Zerah. But and Onan died in the land of Canaan, and Perez's sons were Hezron and Hamu. Issachar's sons, Tola, Puvah, Lov, and Shimron. Zebulun's sons, Sered, Elon, and Yalil. These are the sons of Leah, whom she bore to Jacob and in Padamaran. In addition to Dinah, his daughter, all the people, his sons and daughters, numbered 33.
Thank you so much, Paul. Let me invite Margot. Would you like to read starting at verse 16?
Sure. Thank you. God's sons, Ziphion, Hagi, Shuni, Hezbon, Eri, Arnoi, and Areli. Asher's sons, Inan, Ishva, Ishvi, and Bariah, and their sisters Sarah, Beriah's sons, Heber and Machel. These were the descendants of Ziphah, whom, sorry, gotta turn the page, whom Laban had given his daughter Leah. These she bore to Jacob, 16 persons. The sons of Jacob's wife Rachel were Joseph and Benjamin. To Joseph were born in the land of Egypt Manasseh and Ephraim, whom Asenel's daughter of the Polypera priest of O bore to him. Benjamin, son of Bela, Becher, Ashbel, Gera, and Naaman, Ehi, Rosh, Mupin, and these were the descendants of Rachel, who also bore to Jacob 11 persons in all. I'll let somebody else handle the next.
Okay, thank you. Let me invite David and Susan. Would you like to start there? Verse 23.
Thank you. Verse 23. And Dan's sons, Hushim, and Naphtali's sons were Yazil and Guni and Yezer and Shilem. These were the sons of Bilhah, whom Laban gave to Rachel his daughter, and she gave birth to these for Jacob. All the persons were 7. All the persons of Jacob's who came to Egypt, who came out from his thigh, outside of Jacob's sons' wives, all the persons were 66. And Joseph's sons who were born to him in Egypt were two persons. All the persons of Jacob's house who came to Egypt were 70. And he sent Judah ahead of him to Joseph to direct him in advance to Goshen. And they came to the land of Goshen. And Joseph hitched his chariot and went up to Israel, his father, at Goshen. And he appeared to him and fell on his neck and wept on his neck a long time. And Israel said to Joseph, Let me die now, after I've seen your face, and that you're still alive. So verse 31, Suzanne.
Okay. And Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, let me go up and tell Pharaoh, and let me say to him, my brothers and my father's household that was in the land of Canaan have come to me, and the men are shepherds, for they have always been handlers of livestock, and their sheep and their cattle and all that is theirs they have brought. And so when Pharaoh calls for you and says, what is it you do? You should say, your servants have been handlers of livestock from our youth until now, we and our fathers as well, that you may dwell in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is abhorrent to Egypt.
Thank you,
Great.
Susan. Let me invite Justin. Would you like to start at the very beginning of chapter 47?
Thank you, Rabbi. Joseph came and told Pharaoh, and he said, my father and my brothers and their flocks and their cattle and all that is theirs have come from the land of Canaan, and behold, they are in the land of Goshen. And from among his brothers he took 5 men, and he presented them to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to his brothers, what is your occupation? And they said to Pharaoh, your servants are shepherds, both we and our forefathers. And they said to Pharaoh, we have come to sojourn in the land, for your servants' flocks have no pasture, for the famine is severe in the land of Canaan. Now please let your servants dwell in the land of Goshen. And Pharaoh spoke to Joseph, saying, your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is open before you. The best of the land settle your father and your brothers. Let them dwell in the land of Goshen. And if you know that there are capable men among them, make them livestock officers over what is mine. So Joseph brought his father Jacob and stood him before Pharaoh, and Jacob greeted Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Jacob, how many are the days of the years of your life? And Jacob said to Pharaoh, days of the years of my sojournings are 130 years. The days of the years of my life have been few and miserable, and they have not reached the days of the years of the lives of my forefathers in the days of their sojournings. So Jacob blessed Pharaoh and left Pharaoh's presence.
Thank you so much, Justin. Let me invite Mark Levenstein, if you'd like to read, starting at verse 11.
Thank you, Rabbi. So Joseph settled his father and his brothers, giving them holdings in the choicest part of the land of Egypt, in the region of Ramses, as Pharaoh had commanded. Joseph sustained his father and his brothers and all his father's households with bread, down to the little ones. Now there was no bread in all the world, for the famine was very severe. But the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished because of the famine. Joseph gathered all the money that was to be found in the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan as payment for the rations that were being procured. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's palace. And when the money gave out in the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, give us bread, lest we die before your very eyes, for our money is gone. And Joseph said, bring your livestock, and I will sell to you against your livestock, if the money is gone. So he brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them bread in exchange for the horses, for the stocks of sheep and cattle and the asses. Thus he provided them with bread that year in exchange for all their livestock. When the year was ended, they came to him the next year and said to him, we cannot hide from my lord that with all the money and animal livestock consigned to my lord, nothing is left at my lord's disposal save our persons and our farmland. Let us not perish before your eyes, both we and the land. Take us in our land in exchange for bread, and we with our land will be serfs to Pharaoh. Provide the seed that we may live and not die, that the land may not become a waste.
Thank you, Mark. Jay Iser, would you like to read beginning at verse 20?
Yes, verse 20. So Joseph gained possession of all the farmland of Egypt for Pharaoh, every Egyptian having sold his field because the famine was too much for them. Thus the land passed over to Pharaoh, and he removed the population town by town from one end of Egypt's border to the other. Only the land of the priests he did not take over, for the priests had an allotment from Pharaoh, and they lived off the allotment which Pharaoh had made to them. Therefore, they did not sell their land. Then Joseph said to the people, whereas I have this day acquired you and your land for Pharaoh, here is seed for you to sow the land. And when the harvest comes, you shall give 1/5 to Pharaoh, and 4/5 shall be yours as seed for the fields and as food for you and those in your households and as nourishment for your children. And they said, you have saved our lives. We are grateful to my Lord, and we shall be serfs to Pharaoh. And Joseph made it into a land law in Egypt, which is still valid, that 1/5 should be Pharaoh's. Only the land of the priests did not become Pharaoh's. Thus Israel settled in the country of Egypt, in the region of Goshen. They acquired holdings in it and were fertile and increased greatly.
Thank you, and thank you, everyone. That's our entire Torah portion for the week. If you have a copy of the study sheet, I invite you to take it out. And I note that I've entitled this week's Torah portion study, Reframing. So I'd like to begin just by looking at the painting that I've placed at the very top of the page. It's a painting by a young African-American artist, currently grew up in South Central Los Angeles, now lives in New York, Kehinde Wiley. And I'd like to start just by asking you how you react to this painting and what you see there, and perhaps what it might have to do with the notion of reframing. Anna?
Hand me your picture.
Okay, sorry.
Reframing in this picture is literally reframing. It looks like an Arabic style of design, the frame, the intricacy of the design around the outside of the picture, but I understand it's actually Ukrainian. So that's kind of, you think you have a frame of reference and then it gets reframed for you. And this beautiful person who is obviously a man, for me personally, also resembles in the face my sister-in-law, Chaltulina Ruda. And so it's a reframing of the sexual identity of the person. It's quite lovely and unusual for you to choose. It's a detailed piece. It has calligraphic elements. It has a small detail, repetitive design, and I find it quite lovely.
Lovely. Okay, Richard.
Yes, thank you. When I look at the picture, the first thing that stands out for me is that the subject, the human subject, is in between one part of the picture and the other. So he's not standing in front of the picture, he is actually in the picture. It looks like there's an overlay there, and it says to me that each of us, each person, is a part of what's behind him and what's in front of him. He's not separate from it. That our past and our future and our neighbors and our enemies and our family are all within us, and we are within all of that.
Lovely. Thank you. Okay, and anyone else want to share their? Yes, go ahead, Susan.
So much like what Richard said,
Go ahead.
but it breaks the boundaries. It looks like a person, the painting looks like it's a person in front of a painting, but it breaks the boundaries of that. The painting, he becomes part of the painting, and the painting becomes part of who he is. And so it's a reframing kind of life.
Nice, very nice. Okay, thank you.
I'd
And-
like to also add that it reminds me of the illumination of Christian Bibles from medieval
Huh,
time.
Mhm.
okay, thank you. Okay, and Jay, and then Mark Levinstein. Jay first.
I noticed is the entire name of the painting, Rabbi Alios Yitzhak, the World Stage Israel. Is
Yes,
that the name of this formal name of the painting? Well,
yes.
alios means among others. Inter alios in Latin means among others. So it's others Israel. So another's view of Israel, the world stage Israel. I think that this very much plays out to me as a person who very well at this moment, this many, how many years after, this very well could be the very personification of Pharaoh, even of Joseph. We have no idea of the pigment of their skin. And this person having come onto this stage, this world stage, and if you take it, Alios Yitzhak, the world stage Israel, is not Yitzhak, did he not become Israel? Is that not it? Is it, am I getting them wrong? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Yitzhak, Israel. So I think that and I don't know how Ukraine gets in here. I'm still trying to figure that one out. What does it say up at the top, by the way, Rabbi, in Hebrew?
I can't, I'm not sure I see
It says
this.
Zeh, the second one is Zeh. And in the
Oh,
frame, in the top
in
part of the frame, I have
corner.
it enlarged.
In, each of the
It
corners,
says Mina, yeah, Bina or Mina Zeh, and then down below it says Ruach or Ro, and then Vad Hayam, Hayim, life, Ruach. At the bottom is spirit,
Yeah,
and
very good.
I can't, if you enlarge it,
Thank you. I hadn't.
so what we have here, Rabbi, is
So let me go, let me invite.
I think we
Mark-
have an enigma within a conundrum within something else.
Okay, let me invite Mark Levinstein.
yeah, I mean, I appreciate what everyone else is saying and concur, but there's just so much going on, from the brick structure behind, the flowers behind, the vines in front, the animals. But what struck me were two things. One, just the pose is very interesting pose. I mean, you've got that powerful looking left arm, but there's something almost effeminate about the rest of it in many ways. And then when I first looked at it, before I enlarged it, I was wondering what kind of form line drawing is it on that chest, since you're in the Northwest, and then realizing it's a drill.
Right.
And there's just so many different things that are
Whoa.
they're not necessarily, I wouldn't call them contradictory, but just
No, I don't think.
layers of richness and depth that I could just
What are we looking for?
Drill.
keep
Oh,
looking
yeah.
at this
It's a
and
McKee drill.
seeing more and more. It's when I first looked at it, it was almost disconcerting. There was a cognitive dissonance to it.
Good.
But the more I look at it, it's almost that dissonance is almost becoming a resonance.
Terrific.
Of the interplay of the layers of the complexities of who each of us are, and the world is. It's amazing.
Terrific. So
Okay, now I would like to look at it. I will look at this more, but I see there are a lot of animals in the picture.
Mhm.
And I wonder if these are animals representing the 12 tribes of Israel. I wonder if we've got them all there. I can't do that really quick right now.
Okay.
And it looks like it says Yitzhak, Zeh, Ruach, and then the last is Hayom. I don't know what that last corner is, but
that's fantastic. You've all seen so much. It's just fantastic. So let me just share with you a little bit more about our artist, Kehinde Wiley. So Kehinde Wiley, who did grow up in South Central Los Angeles, And he took great pleasure in going to the Huntington and looking at some of the great traditional works of art that are at the Huntington. And then he eventually went to art school and now resides in New York. So Kehinde Wiley actually locates himself within the tradition of classical portraiture. And that includes people like Reynolds and Gainsborough and Titian. So the traditional subjects of those great portraitists were people, men who were wealthy, powerful, majestic, the ruling elite, self-confident. So what Kehinde Wiley did as one of his major pieces is to conduct what he called the global project, the world stage. So he actually traveled the globe to insert people of color into this Western tradition of portraiture. And one of the first places he went to was Israel. And while he was in Israel, he spent a lot of time in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, and he would run into young Ethiopian Jews in particular who wanted to talk about contemporary life in Israel. But they talked about it through their own unique lens of African culture, hip hop music, a certain style of their own. And this young man that we see here in this painting, Elios Yitzhak, is indeed of Ethiopian origin. And as Anna indicated, he's standing before a background that's actually inspired by a cutout 19th century Ukrainian Mizrach, a piece that we put on a synagogue wall to indicate the direction of the east. What's fascinating about this whole story is that representatives from the Jewish Museum in New York, when they saw this piece, they immediately recognized the Mizrach that he painted as the background because it's in the Jewish Museum in New York. And they were so taken by that they immediately bought the piece. And then they encouraged him to have an exhibition at the Jewish Museum that consisted of pieces that he painted during his trip to Israel. This piece, by the way, is quite large. It's 9 feet tall.
Wow.
So it's quite stunning. I was very fortunate to see the exhibit of I think it was 10 pieces that he had exhibited at the Jewish Museum that were based on his trip to Israel. So in a sense, what Kehinde Wiley is doing here is he's taking something that was quite a classic form known as portraiture, and instead of having the traditional subjects be in his paintings, that of the ruling elite from white European culture, he has, in a sense, subverted that by inserting those who were certainly at certain times the more marginalized. And the fact that he has someone here of Ethiopian origin, as someone has indicated, it kind of begins to confound our own sense of what's an Israeli. Who's an Israeli? When you're thinking about an Israeli, what comes to your mind? And so the fact that we have in the background this work of art from Ukrainian Jewish culture, and standing in front of it is someone from the Ethiopian Jewish culture, it begins to kind of challenge our sense of what to expect. And so in that sense, he's beginning to reframe what goes on the canvas with something that begins to ambiguate our own senses of and our own expectations. So I'd like to now take that sense of how our artist breaks with tradition by reframing literally on his canvas something that goes beyond our expectations and presents us something quite new and quite bold and quite intriguing. So number one on the study sheet, I have a series of verses that I want to suggest begins to show us something about the evolution of Joseph. So the first is from chapter 37, verse 7, and this is at a very early stage in Joseph's life, and we've just met him in the text, and he tells his brothers that he's had this dream, his older brothers, that he's had this dream. And Joseph says, your sheaves gathered around and bowed low to my sheaf. So this begins this source of irritation that his older brothers have with Joseph, because they begin to think, why should we be bowing down to our younger brother? Then he has another dream, and this one he presents to the whole family. And Joseph says, in this dream, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me. Now, 11 stars, well, that means the 11 other brothers, the sun and the moon, the mother and the father. Okay. And so the entire family now is bowing down to Joseph. So it's no wonder that this starts to create a kind of friction within the family. This great gift that Joseph has manifests itself through his self-orientation, through putting himself in the center of the entire family, and just kind of innocently perhaps assuming that they would all pay obeisance to him, bow down before him. We take this a little bit further into our story. And now we're going to look at a verse where Joseph is now in prison, and he is interpreting the dreams of the baker and the cupbearer. And he says to them, after he's interpreted their dreams, do me the kindness of mentioning me to Pharaoh, so as to free me from this bite. For I was kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and I have not done anything here that they should have put me in the pit, which is in Hebrew is bore. So a couple of things here. One, we have the word bite, and in some very more literal translations, they might render bite as this house, this structure, this prison. But the word bait, or in this case, bayit, it also means not just a physical structure, but it's often rendered as household, or in some cases, lineage. So it's interesting to think about, here is Jacob in this prison, this confinement, having been sold into slavery by his own family. Is he perhaps saying, free me from this lineage that I am a part of, which has caused him nothing but grief? Perhaps. It's an interesting way to think about it. And then he ends it by saying, I have not done anything here that they should have put me in this pit, this bore. The word is significant because the word bore is the same word that's used to describe when Joseph's brothers threw him into a pit, a bore. So he's having this, this resonance between where he is now in this prison and that condition with being down in another pit when his brothers threw him in there. So he's going through some kind of crisis, some kind of resonance, some kind of maybe even a post-traumatic experience here between the incident with his brothers and now the incident here in Egypt. Now he's been, we're going to move on to another verse. And now the setting is he has been taken from prison and brought before Pharaoh in order to perhaps interpret Pharaoh's dream. And Joseph does indeed. And at this time, when Joseph interprets the dream, he says, let Pharaoh organize the land of Egypt in the 7 years of plenty. We've moved a little bit in Joseph's own evolution and development, and perhaps it's because of these challenging experiences he's had both back in the land of Canaan with his brothers, and then with being arrested and thrown into prison in Egypt, because now he uses his gift of being a seer, of being a dream interpreter, in the service of saving others, rather than placing himself in the center of everything. And at the conclusion of his presentation to Pharaoh, Pharaoh says, well, you understand not only the dream, but you understand what must be done. So I'm going to place you in charge of implementing this rescue plan that you've just described. And so we now read this verse. Leaving Pharaoh's presence, Joseph traveled through all the land of Egypt. We're reaching another stage in Joseph's development because now he has been given a mission. He's no longer just this self-indulgent young lad. He's no longer this grievant experiencing this post-traumatic syndrome and grieving about how he shouldn't be in this prison and he wants to be free from his family connections. Now he's been given this mission, and this image of him now traveling throughout all the land of Egypt. There's a sense of now of release, of purpose, of developing a new life. So we know the story what we've just read about the brothers coming down and then Judah stepping forward. And this is followed by Joseph's revealing who he is. So I just want to suggest that up to this moment of an encounter with the brothers and Judah telling him the story, something has happened with Joseph. His act of estrangement, which we talked about last week, Joseph's intentional act of estrangement from his brothers has somehow elicited from Judah this expression of compassion, of regret, of longing, of caring for his father, of his refusal to leave Benjamin behind. And it is, in a sense, a reversal of their behavior, because now Joseph has elicited from at least Judah the notion that he's not going to treat Benjamin the way he had treated himself. He's not going to be abandoned. And so at this point, Joseph, who has kind of engineered, if you will, this change of heart, who has brought about this reconciliation, immediately steps forward and says here in number 2, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save lives by a great deliverance. So then it was not you who sent me here, but God. Joseph is doing this remarkable thing. At this point, what he's doing is he's reframing the events of the past as a way to liberate his brothers from the burden of a very destructive guilt, which they've already obviously begun to feel. So he's retelling the story of their past in a way that doesn't fit with what you and I have read in the text as what happened. But he's retelling the story so that they can together have a new life. So that is the reframing here that Joseph is engaging in. So if you turn over the sheet, I want to share with you 3 contemporary psychologists who, with slightly different emphases, each address the power that we have to choose how to live into the future rather than feel eternally captive of the past. The first that we're going to encounter is Viktor Frankl, who was a survivor of a concentration camp, wrote a magnificent small book, In Search of Meaning, and he wrote this. Between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. What I found fascinating about this is not only Frankl's notion that we can't always determine what's going to happen to us, but we can determine how we're going to respond what happens to us. And he characterizes that moment as being this fracture, if you will, this space. And it's in that space where we find our power to choose how we're going to react to our conditions. The next psychologist I want to share with you is Aaron Beck. Aaron Beck is considered to be the founder of behavioral cognitive therapy. And he wrote this: if our thinking is bogged down by distorted symbolic meanings, illogical reasoning, and erroneous interpretations, we become in truth blind and deaf. We can intervene consciously about the interpretation that we make of things that happen to us. We can choose to internalize, we can choose what to internalize about certain facts. So he really was one of the primary promoters of a form of therapy that essentially said, you can begin to think yourself into a different way of life. And again, this notion that this term that I kind of circled on my page is the term intervene. This notion of intervening in a flow of events, that we can break this chain somehow by consciously choosing how we want to internalize the facts that we're experiencing. And the final psychologist I want to share with you is Martin Seligman, who is one of the primary movers behind what would be called a positive psychology. And he wrote this: above all, during the interval, change from ego orientation to task orientation. While you can't control your experiences, you can control your explanations. Pessimistic labels lead to passivity, whereas optimistic ones lead to attempts to change. Once again, I circled on my page here the word interval, this notion that there is a rupture, if you will, or as Frankl talks about, a space, and what Aaron Beck talks about, an intervening, and here Martin Seligman talks about an interval. And I love this notion that he brings up about changing from ego orientation to task orientation, because that's what we've just read in this Torah portion. We've read this transition that Joseph goes through from placing himself at the center of everything, of being ego oriented, to then assuming this great mission of saving the world, a task orientation. And that seems to have been just so key in his own self-transformation of his orientation to his family, to himself, perhaps. So I'd like to share with you this little quote from great teacher. I was fortunate to be with David Hartman, and to tie it back to Hanukkah. And that's in number 4. He wrote, in celebrating Hanukkah, we remind ourselves that our Jewish identity must not be grounded in biological descent, but in a heroic commitment to a way of life. Our past, the memories we bring from the home we came from, are only the beginning stages of our spiritual self-understanding as Jews. How we live in the present and what we aspire for in the future must be the major sources nurturing our identity as Jews. I want to share with you my reflection that all of these commentaries that we have just read through all express themes that we see in Torah. That Torah is not so much about arrival, but about departure and journey. The way of Torah is not so much about faithful certainty, but about generative questioning. That the way of Torah is not so much about submission, but initiative. It is a tradition that is sustained by innovation. innovation, such as we encountered at the beginning of our session with Kehinde Wiley, our artist, and his relationship to the classical form of portraiture. He honors that tradition by reframing that received tradition with canvases populated with figures from a broader world. And that juxtaposition of classical form and contemporary beings of often marginalized populations disturbs our expectations, and it provokes a perplexity that expands our sense of who dwells in our world and what might be possible in it. So with that, I'd love to hear further insights and reflections that you've had about this week's worship.
In regard to what you just said, this is the artist who painted that beautiful portrait of Barack Obama
Yes.
with the green leaves all behind, which was a very audacious, outstanding interpretation of a presidential portrait. That's amazing.
Yes, so it's lovely that you bring that up, because that portrait of President Barack Obama, normally one would see portraits of presidents of being rather formal, certainly with a suit and tie, presenting kind of a sense of confidence and kind of standing upright. And if you recall the painting of Barack Obama, first of all, he doesn't have a tie. He's sitting and he's leaning forward. It's a very different presentation now.
And the background of all the green vines.
And the
It's the
background.
background that's
Yeah.
non-traditional, totally,
Yeah.
and very excitingly so.
Thank you for bringing that into the conversation. And Margot.
You know, when Joseph was a child, he was egocentric, as all children are. All children are egocentric. But most children have parents have good parents who shape them, who teach them to care for others. Joseph did this without parents. He had no parents to teach him, yet he evolved into this person.
Nor did he have a good grandma and grandpa.
It's in your,
His own, and through his adversity, not through loving parentage.
That's right, exactly. He went down from one pit into another. Yes,
Right.
Thank you. Okay. Others, and Richard, did you have something?
I was just going to say
A little louder.
that Joseph had some time with Rachel before they flew away.
What?
And she's pretty wonderful.
Mhm.
So he's capable of love. He's bonded somewhere.
Okay, thank
And
you.
Yeah, anytime that one's able to bring joy into the world by changing their attitude, or reflect on children cartwheeling in the sun, or the bright sunshine, or the fact that there's scientists at work and engineers at work and intelligent people in the world, notwithstanding all the stuff that we deal with, but can get to that attitude. And then everything that's happened in their life up to that point, trauma, joy, whatever it was, has led to the moment in time in which now they're able to put it together in a positive frame. And that's what we all need to recognize. I believe that we all have wonderful past, notwithstanding all the trauma, because we're able to get to the point that exactly what Rabbi is talking about and Frankel's talking about. There's a space where we can gather ourselves and not just be optimistic, but hopeful.
Hopeful.
And with that hopeful, then we're driven to automatically do the right thing.
Thank you, Richard. Okay. And others like to share some thoughts and reflections.
I think Jay had his hand up. But I have
No,
my hand up.
it was residual. My hand is down.
Okay. Okay. David, then. Okay.
I'm having a great deal of trouble with this Torah portion. The ending of it last year, and now even more stronger this year, has twisted my gut.
Why?
Because in the story, Jacob as the right-hand man of Pharaoh, and it mostly sounds like at his own initiation and planning.
Jacob or Joseph?
Joseph, pardon me. Manages to manage this famine into acquiring all the money and all the land and all the livestock, which parenthetically cows weren't counted as money, and put them in Pharaoh's power. Essentially, he turns, this isn't essentially, but one extreme way of looking at it is he turns Egypt for everyone but Pharaoh and his people and the Hebrews into an empire of Russian serfdom. The people aren't just made into serfs on their land. It also says that most of them are shipped to the cities, which historically has been part of the, quote, agricultural revolution, unquote, that created an elite ruling class and an oppressed lower class. And it's in my mind the whole time we're talking about the trajectory of the core of Joseph's spiritual life with all its lessons. And he's, the way we tell this story of the Joseph story, it makes him more heroic, more perfect than our other ancestors. And last year, as we went through the rest of Torah study, I kept expecting and kind of keeping my eye out for what were the repercussions of this almost evil act against the Egyptians, where people's the thing that people do in our story that is egocentric and thoughtless and not thinking about the future have negative repercussions down the road that teach us things. And I haven't really uncovered that. It's similar in a way to the reaction I've had since a teenager to the punishing of the Egyptian people in order to provide a lesson to the Jews that God is powerful and important. It's just hard to take.
Okay, so let me do this. Thank you, David. I want to invite anyone who'd like to respond or reflect upon what David has just shared, because what I offered up was a reflection on the psychological dimension of what Joseph is engaged in here, rather than the socio-political aspects of what's here. But I have some thoughts about it, but I want to invite other people to perhaps respond to it. Let me call on Paul first.
Yeah, I've been in David's corner almost from the beginning. It almost seems since I was a kid that when I read the Bible, it was just one terrible story after another. Also, I went to a yeshiva where all the rabbis, I was there during World War II, where all my rabbis were people who were successfully got out of Europe, and they were these are people who all lost their families, and so that their view of the Bible, of God, was really pretty tough stuff. And so I was kind of trained, and you know what, it's pretty bad. And so you see, each week that we follow the stories, I see the bad side. But what I enjoy about this particular group is like the paintings, number one, but two, all these great stories or these great people who come up with these other lessons to be learned. And so what I do is I tune in each week because I know I'm going to get that Rorschach test at the beginning. And I sometimes find myself having to defend that side because it seems like you're looking right past it. So I try to wave it at you. But, and then David did it really in a very strong way. And in a way that was the way that's unfortunately the way I was trained. But now what's happening as I get older and listening to you all my attention being brought to these different great thinkers, I find that whatever did it to those people to make them think that way, you know what, the heck with the Rorschach test and the ink plots. I'm enjoying so much the paintings and the sayings of these other people. I'm just a slave to these weekly meetings. So, so I really enjoy, the rabbi's version of the Torah and his people. I'm not so clear about, it doesn't make a difference what the Rorschach test was.
Okay, let me see if we can continue this line. Go ahead, Richard.
Yes, I like what David said very much. And, there's a piece there, two pieces that come to mind. One is that a 20% tax rate isn't really that bad if it will serve to, pave the roads, get the mails working, get government work done, and to be able to keep the other 80% to yourself for your hard labor on the land. You can call that serfism, you can call that serfdom, you can call it feudalism, you can call it socialism, you can call it whatever you want. I think there's a way to frame that to suggest that one thing he's saying is that, there's only one God, and it's up there or in us or whatever it is, and we all have to pull our oars. And that's the analogy, that's the message of this thing that Joseph is involved in. He starts out egocentric and he tries to wind up. What does he do? And maybe the big problem for the Jews was that they gained holdings and became capitalists. And what did the serfs become? How did it get in the 400 years then when a Pharaoh arose who knew not Joseph? How did these serfs, Egyptian serfs, turn into Jewish slaves? That's another part of a whole nother story. I'm just saying that there's a way to not take this so literally and fundamentally, but to understand what's going on in government and trying to attempt to make something work for everyone. And the Jews had, suddenly they're cattle people, suddenly they're going down there and organizing the people, the Bolsheviks. What's going on? This is a form in the evolution of society to bring some kind of holism there. It doesn't work real well. It falls apart. Judah and Ephraim don't hold together, but we still are at the camp of the road. Jews is a camp in the road by the side of history. We're still working on it. So I wouldn't get I can't get myself too angry with Joseph for making this attempt, or too angry for the author presenting this piece of the Rorschach. When you look at a Rorschach, you look at the whole picture, or you pull out little pieces of it. And depending upon how you approach the whole is how you get graded.
Okay.
I just have to quickly interrupt about Rorschach, which is that earlier today we had a discussion among us on Tanakh in Isaiah, and one of the participants, who's a psychologist, says there's an inkblot that is informally called by many psychologists the trauma inkblot, because for people who've experienced trauma, it just many times bubbles up a lot of expression about their trauma.
So
that's a good thing.
It's a good thing.
Here's what you caused me to think about, David and Paul and everyone. One has to do with Joseph and perhaps also Jacob's, but Joseph really personifies it at a higher level. This tension between being a dreamer and being an administrator. So both Jacob, the father, also has these qualities. He's a dreamer. He had that incredible dream with the ladder, but he's also a schemer and a manipulator. Joseph, similarly, even perhaps more so than his father, has these incredible skills as someone who dreams and also who can interpret dreams. But clearly what we're seeing in this week's Torah portion also is his skill as a very strategic administrator. So imagine you're offered the choice. You could be one or the other. Which would you rather be? Would you rather be the dreamer, or would you rather be the administrator, the strategic planner? If you're the dreamer or the dream interpreter, you can have these wonderful dreams. You can help people understand their dreams. And then someone turns to you and says, wow, that's an amazing dream you have. Let's start making it happen. And you go, no, thanks. I just like kind of being at the dream level, because I know if I start implementing my dream, this person's going to complain, and that one's going to say, let's start a committee and let's have a study and all those things. And I just like having my painting and having the dream. I don't want to be on a committee, okay? And have to make compromises. I like my dream, and that's it. And so it's this incredible drama that we're seeing played out between his impulses to be a dreamer, and then the impulse and skill he has to be a strategic planner. So the other thing that you made me think about is we're going to be reading pretty soon that Pharaoh knew not of Joseph. And what it made me think about was there are people who promote a certain political or socioeconomic plan, and then it has, as every plan does, these unintended consequences. I didn't mean for that to happen. And so it results in a backlash. So here's, in a more modern sense, the way I kind of redefine it, I reframe it. There was this great American president called Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who took extraordinary measures in order to pull this country out of a disaster known as the Depression. And it saved millions, tens of millions of people. And then at some point, there began to be kind of a reaction to it. And we might say, there was another president named Ronald Reagan who knew not Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So I just want to suggest that maybe the text is also reminding us that there are these critical moments when drastic decisions need to be made. And that doesn't mean that they're the same drastic decisions that should be made in every situation, because there will be these consequences, and there will be at some point a reaction to them and going off in a new direction that creates perhaps a different type of crisis and requiring a different type of leader. So with that, I want to thank all of you for being the wonderful leaders, dreamers, executives, planners, and certainly students that I'm so proud to be a part of. And I hope that each one of us is continually able to reframe the events that happen to us in a way that makes us able to move forward in our lives in a healthy manner. God bless you all, and see you soon. Be well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.